At noon in Atlanta between number one Georgia and Clemson. These two teams opened the season against each other a few years ago in an absolute dogfight. No pun intended. Super low scoring game. These two teams used to play every single year. Used to be a non-conference rivalry, I think from like the 60s to the 80s for like 20 years. I love when these two teams play. Georgia sitting at around 13 and a half point favorite here. Total sitting at 48 and a half. All I wanted in this game was Clemson plus 14, and I was able to get it. And I just was watching the market. I don't know where it's going to be when this comes out. I would recommend, if you agree with me, to watch the market. I think there'll be more Georgia money coming in, more likely than Clemson money. But the only thing is that there's injuries, suspension news that could come out for Georgia that could push this number down even further. So even at 13 and a half, I would take Clemson over Georgia. What am I talking about with all of this uncertainty? Well, it's been a messy offseason for Georgia. Arrests out the wazoo. Rara Thomas kicked off the team and headed into this game. ETN, their star back they got from Florida, is he going to play? DUI arrest, might be suspended. A couple backs behind him are dealing with injuries. This is already a team that lost Milton and Edwards at running back. So now they obviously have talent everywhere when you're talking about Georgia, but now the experience starts to get very, very low. Pass catchers, Bowers and McConkey are gone. You lose Mims to the NFL as well, but you have Truss back, and he was hurt last year. I don't think it's a huge loss. Center, bigger question mark with Van Pran gone. We'll see how that plays out against a really good Clemson defensive line. And I think the secondary could take a step back initially. He lost Bullard, Lassiter, and Smith to the NFL. And then at linebacker, Munden, is he going to play? Dumas Johnson went off to Kentucky. Obviously, ton of young talent there, but experience drop. And do they have that? I love Williams. I think he's going to be a hell of a player. But do they have that? Like, they don't have that, at least as of right now, that dominant player on the interior who can just wreck the entire game. So, there's some questions on this Georgia team relative to, being the best team in the country. I don't think that right now they're as dominant, as they were a couple years ago. It's going to take some time, and they're going to have to get a full roster together. Defensive, every level of their defense, there's questions. You lost all those pros in the secondary. Linebacker, Munden. Defensive line, interior depth has taken a hit. Center, your running back, even wide receiver, like waiting to see who definitely steps up there across the board. On the Clemson side, there are definitely questions as well, starting at center. Is the center position going to be okay? That's the biggest question along the offensive line, which I do think will be better. Bring Matt Luke in, more experience. The offense in general, I expect to be better. Number one, just regression, turnovers, injuries, fumbles, just overall luck, red zone, things that they were just so unlucky in last year, and that naturally regressed the following year. Klubnik should be better in year two of Riley's system. The wide receiver room is much better, bringing two really good freshmen, and they should just be healthier. And now Maffa, more Maffa. I was screaming that last year. Get Shipley out of here. More Maffa. So I think the Clemson offense will be better. The defense does lose a lot, but they just reloaded. I mean, this is a team that played 6 true freshmen last year that started 3+ games on the defensive side of the ball. The biggest question is at corner. They could have injuries there, and then you're down to freshmen, and things could get really dicey against Carson Beck. But at around 2 touchdowns, I like Clemson to keep this close. What say you?
Yeah, that was a lot. I mean, that was a lot of everything that I have there. So I do have the same feelings, the same sentiments about everything. And this is such a massive game. I mean, 4 national championships between these two since 2016. It's and crazy enough, the national championship is going to be played this year in this building. With Cade Klubnik, it's a question of, do you believe what he was able to do at the end of last year? He had
Definitely
19.
improved.
Oh, it very much improved. He had 19 turnover worthy plays the entire season, but only 4 of them came in the last 5 games against South Carolina, North Carolina, Notre Dame, some other teams out there. Now, he had 12 big time throws and 19 touchdowns. Now, the reason I bring that up and that discrepancy is because that is what shows you when his skill positions are actually doing the work and not him himself. And so the targets did all the work. And there's always been questions about can the wide receiver stable create separation from defensive backs and get free so Klubnik can hit them? It looks like that's going to happen here. Antonio Williams should be completely healthy. He needs to return to form to what he had 2 years ago as an explosive guy out of the slot. Tight end Jake Brenningstool became one of the most favorite targets of Klubnik last year. But the guy that's turning heads in camp, the guy that everybody's talking about, his maturity, his explosiveness, his hands, everything. Bryant Westco, very highly rated wide receiver that is going to get a lot of playing time here. Maybe he is the answer that we've been looking for a few years when it comes to targets in the Clemson passing game that need to create separation from the opposing secondary. Now, when you look at what Clemson is bringing back, it's like one of the best offensive line and running back combinations in the country. You mentioned that Phil Maffa is going to get all the carries. He's done sharing time with Will Shipley. He's done sharing time with Kobe Pace. It's finally Phil Maffa time.
We saw that worked against Notre Dame. That was like one of the best their offenses looked all year.
He's an animal, absolute animal. And, the offensive line is returning 70% of snaps. So we have everything that we need for the ingredients for Clemson on the offensive side of the ball here. But you mentioned it. I think the biggest X factor here is the fact that Matt Luke is the new offensive line coach. What was Matt Luke's last job? He was the offensive line coach for Kirby Smart at Georgia. Kirby Smart mentioned that this week. If he's mentioning it out loud, it's a big deal. So there's a lot of feathers in the cap here for the Clemson offense to see if they can get something done. And then you mentioned what's going on in this Georgia defense. Not only are there some depth issues on the defensive line, there's a couple injuries that are happening on the interior. There's kind of a big, chatter going on about Mykel Williams coming off the edge and going back to outside linebacker. That kind of kills the depth that you have. And I know, listen, we're talking about Georgia. I understand that everybody's a 5-star down to the third level. I get it. But experience is something, and Mykel Williams was a big part of that edge position last year. Now, 3 starters are gone from the secondary. You're going to see
all to the NFL.
All to the NFL. Freshman KJ Bolden is going to get his first taste of action here. So it's, you're trying to punch holes into Georgia. You're looking for true freshmen. You're looking for units that have depth issues. We've got that all over here for Georgia. The suspensions, we know that it's just university policy, right? DUIs, reckless driving, you're going to get suspended. And that's what's going to happen to Florida transfer Trevor Etienne. He's going to be a part of that group. That's bad for a running back unit that already lost Rod Robinson. He had a toe in. I think he had surgery on his toe earlier this week. So he's definitely not playing this week. And I think that kind of leads to the fact that this total keeps going down. But if Georgia can't run the ball against this Clemson defensive line.
And if Clemson is one or a couple of their starting corners back, then Kirby Smart is outstanding coach, and they still center is a little bit of question. They're still one of the best offensive lines in college football. So you would think it's, hey, running back room's banged up. Clemson has some injury questions, and that's the room with the biggest question mark is their secondary. Let's come out and throw it all around. And we also think that the Clemson offense will be better, which would definitely keep. No, I would not want the under here.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't want the under either. I mean, the thing is people are focusing so much on Brock Bowers being gone. I get it. I love the numbers. I love the fact that he lined up at every single position on the field all the time. Well, Georgia fans, you're fine. Ben Urasek did the exact same thing for Stanford and Troy Taylor's offense. So they're going to be fine from that. But the question
plus they did play without him. Like he was hurt too. So it's not like they
that's when it was Ladd McConkey time, right? Whenever Bowers got hurt, it was time for Ladd. And so I think the question is how quick into this game before Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator for Georgia, decides we're not going to try to run the ball with a walk-on that just transferred here from Texas. I think his name is Cash. Almost said Cash Wheeler. That's a wrestler. But, listen, this is going to be, I think, a fact-finding trip in the first half for Georgia. We got depth issues. We got freshmen. We might not be able to run the ball. How long does it take until they open up the offense? Well, my best bet for this that I've got money on, there are 7.5s out there. Clemson +7 or better in the first half. This team is pissed. They're being disrespected. And from a recruiting perspective, from a blue chip recruiting perspective, Clemson is right there with Georgia. You and I talked at length about when the depth issues and the transfer portal issues are going to catch up to Clemson. It's not going to happen in this game. So I expect Clemson to be able to run the ball against a defensive line that has some depth issues. I don't expect Georgia's run game to produce anything without their 2 top running backs. I like first half Clemson +7. I could even be talked into a money line in the first half on Clemson. And I tell you what, Stuck, if Clemson wins this game, I'm not going to be surprised. I won't be surprised at all because, listen, it's not that far off in the talent base.
Coming around on my to make the playoff future, which is why I bet it before the season. So yeah, this is for the first time in a while. It's a Clemson podcast. Unfortunately, later in the show, it might not be LSU Tigers podcast, but maybe we'll get to that. Yeah, I like that as well. I mean, I think for my bet, it would be, this is obvious to say, but I don't want Clemson playing from way behind. I need them
No.
to stay ahead of the chains, and that would end up in a disaster, I think. All right, good stuff there. Looking forward to that. And by the way, speaking of in regards to the total, it's being played at Mercedes-Benz Fast Track. Keep that in mind.
Oh, and I think the other thing too, if Bobo decides to come out and have Carson Beck throw in standard downs, first down, you see that right away. Take a live over. I mean, if they've already decided they're not going to run the ball, it's gonna be a big game.
By the way, I think Dabo's 9-1 against the spread, including the postseason, as an underdog of 6 or more points. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And the only loss was almost 10 years ago to the day against Georgia, for what it's worth.
I think half those wins are against Ohio State, but
hopefully history doesn't repeat itself 10 years later.